In this video I'm going to be explaining the AQA Art and Design assessment criteria and talking about each of the 4 assessment objectives, and while I'm doing that I'll be using an example from a student that received an A grade, which was before it was the numbered grade, so that would be the equivalent of a 7 today. So the AQA assessment criteria for GCSE looks like this. So you have the 4 assessment objectives: AO1, develop ideas through investigations demonstrating critical understanding of sources; AO2, refine your work by exploring ideas; AO3, record ideas, observations and insights; AO4, present a personal and meaningful response that realises intentions. So those are the 4 assessment objectives, and then each of these are marked out of 24. So AO1 would be marked out of 24, AO2 would be marked out of 24, and so on. AQA don't give you grade boundaries, but I have marked out roughly where these are. So here, this top box here is pretty much for the 9s. So an exceptional ability is a 9. The top of the highly developed box, you're looking at an 8, the bottom of it a 7, and then in this box you've got kind of a crossover of 3 grades. So really 4, 5 and 6, there's very few marks in between. There's not a lot of difference between those. So if you're in a consistent ability, if you're on the lower end of that, you might even still get a 4, you might get a 5 or a 6 depending on where you are. And of course it is possible that you could be, for example, a 16 in AO1, a 12 in AO2, 14 in AO3 and a 14 in AO4. So it's whatever that averages out to the marks basically. And if you're wondering specifically how many marks you need to get certain grades, then I will put those in the description below. But just remember that the coursework is 60% and the exam is 40%. So the percentages do change the grades a little bit. But generally you're looking, you know, if you're consistently, for example, in your coursework and your exam getting around about the 16s and 17s mark, you're looking at potentially getting a 7, possibly a 6 depending if you've got more 16s and 17s, for example. So now I'm going to go into talking specifically about AO1. So it says to develop ideas through investigations demonstrating critical understanding of sources. So you need to show your critical understanding by artist research. So just to give you some examples of where assessment objective would be, 1 would be checked off: develop ideas through investigation. So the first thing is to be investigating. So you might find this more at the start of the book, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you do these in order. So this student was looking at perspectives, and that could really be taken in any way. A bit too bright to see what that is there, but it's a sketch of I don't know how to get rid of the light. There we go. You can see now, hopefully. So that they were kind of experimenting with a couple of different ideas, of course, like teacher-led things at the start, just to give a bit of an idea. But they did go for this idea of looking at humans and animals, and that was a personal idea to them. So that actually helps with assessment objective 4, which says present a personal and meaningful response. And this student did do that by nature making the project actually link to their own interests, and that you can see that in their work throughout. Critical understanding, that's particularly when looking at artists. So your research shouldn't just be off Wikipedia and just describing the work. You need to be showing analytical understanding really as well, so analysing the work itself, as well as being critical of it, really talking about your opinions as well. And the way that we know, what kind of grade things are going to get, well, so in this case, this student had just or adequately enough highly developed ability to effectively develop ideas through creative and purposeful investigations, a highly developed ability to demonstrate critical understanding of sources. And she didn't just show critical understanding through her writing, but she's also showing critical understanding. I'll just do that again so you can actually see. She's shown that she can understand the artist's work by the way that she responds to it. So it's not just about explaining with written work that she understands the work. She's shown that she understands the work by the way that she's responded to it. She hasn't also gone and directly copied any of these. She's used her own photos and come up with her own ideas, but still at this stage it's very similar to the artist, and that's okay to have work that is similar. Then she's tried a few different things. It's really, really bright. And here you can see she's looked at another artist there as well. So she explores a lot of different artists, quite a few, and looks at different styles and things. So that is also showing, a wide range of artists. But it doesn't mean that you have to look at loads and loads. You could still get good grades with even just looking at one or two artists, maybe even more thoroughly. So she's round about here for this. And it also says through creative and purposeful investigation. So is looking at this artist relevant to what she's trying to do? Well, when you look at her mood board at the start and the styles of paintings that she's trying to look at, she's trying to create this fairly realistic appearance, but she's not too worried about it being absolutely real. She still wants it to look like a painting. Then, of course, by looking at this artist here, possibly something that she's found on Pinterest, she's really looking at the style of how they've painted and even the angle that the portrait has been taken from. So she's thinking about not necessarily including typical angles, and of course that's what she's done with her work here, where she's just played around rather than just doing a simple portrait straight on. She's played around with it a little bit more, and really, especially with assessment objective 1, it's how the work develops. So you can really see how she's come up with that initial idea. She's trying lots of different things, which comes under assessment objective 2, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail. But it really develops, and she starts to combine and mix things together. So she started taking that idea from that other artist, but she's now used watercolour and pencil using different media. And it really starts to, let's see if we can see that. I don't know if we're going to be able to see it. It's got some designs there for a kind of mini outcome. Just to show you some of those smaller outcomes she's done that she's tried outside of her book to see what works. And you can see, especially with GCSE, you might see development in skill. So this isn't her only sketchbook. This is one of 2 sketchbooks, and this is her more recent one. And if you look at the start of her other project, which is Still Life, which is more teacher-led. So this is her more kind of personal, and this is a lot more teacher-led. They were all doing similar things in class, but you can see how her skill level has developed. And this is, actually I'll talk about assessment objective 2 now, because this covers that quite a lot. But development, so she's developed into this. It's one of her final pieces. For coursework, you don't necessarily have to have one specific final piece. She's got a range of outcomes. You may prefer one to another, but this is her kind of, her last piece that she's done. So you can see how it's developed from that original artist that she'd looked at, and she'd taken some inspiration from this other artist here as well. And you can see in this one quite a lot that her exploration has actually allowed her to develop her skills as well with this work and what she's drawing. So assessment objective 2, refine work by exploring ideas, selecting and experimenting with appropriate media, materials, techniques and processes. So this is very, very practical. Refining, think of that as being sort of perfecting the work. So perfecting it by exploring different ideas, selecting, experimenting with appropriate media. So you don't have to experiment with every single different media. This book is really a lot of experimenting. It's not so much personal work. It's, of course, we're covering assessment objective 1 again with that artist research. We're showing development from one idea, development between the ideas as well, what she's doing, how she started looking at one thing and then turned it into something else. Experimentation, really easy things to do, like photocopying things or printing things out, printing layouts out rather than you having to, she didn't need to paint this out loads of different times to test out different colours. If you can use a digital tool in some way to help you experiment, then that is really, really handy, because she can then try out different things without having to redraw it every single time. She's just drawn out that original piece. Use Photoshop, or you could use many other apps to do this. And of course, again, a lot of assessment objective 1, a lot of AO2, really experimenting, lots of experimenting with different media. So by the time she gets onto this next project, she kind of has, a sense of what she likes, what she's best at. Actually, really good oil pastels as well, but then maybe that wasn't relevant to what her intentions were with her other projects, so she may have decided not to use that. It depends what your project is about and what is going to get across what you're trying to do. So this was a lot of exploring, and it doesn't matter if you occasionally have something in that isn't as good as something else, because you're just showing you're trying different things, and not only experimenting with different media but also techniques. So maybe the way that you apply the paint that's slightly different, maybe overlapping different media to see what can help you achieve whatever it is you're trying to achieve. Media, materials, techniques and processes. So yeah, of course, what order you're doing things in, what is the difference between maybe whether you put some watercolour paint down and then you colour pencil on top, or what's the difference with if you colour pencil and then you watercolour over the top? How is that different? Of course, experimenting with testing out colours. You probably do this anyway. If you're going to be painting something, you probably do test it out, and you probably do have a little spare bit of paper that you're just testing something out. So just keep those things and stick them in. It doesn't have to be an afterthought, and you should really experiment before you do this, because otherwise you've done something and then you experiment and realise, oh, actually I should have done it this way, because then it's too late, and that's not the point. You should be showing your genuine experimentation. This is something that was a little bit different to the rest of the class that she took further, and that would also have helped her get more marks for this, because she's gone that extra bit that someone else didn't. Personal objects, that also helps with assessment objective 4, which I'll come on to a little bit later, where we're talking about personal and meaningful response. So let's move on to assessment objective 3. Record ideas, observations and insights relevant to intentions as work progresses. So we're talking about skill here. So a highly developed ability to skillfully record ideas, observations and insights through drawing and annotation and any other appropriate means relevant to intentions and work as work progresses. So a highly developed ability to skillfully record ideas. If we go further down here, for example, limited some ability, I'm really talking about sort of a grade 2 here. So some ability to record ideas. It doesn't even mention skillful. It's just saying simply to be able to record ideas relevant to intentions as work progresses. This here, when we're talking about coming into a grade 3, that's when it requires some sort of skillful recording, and that doesn't mean that it has to be realistic. Skillful does not mean realistic. It could be you're skillfully conveying a message across in another way, you're skillfully manipulating materials. It doesn't mean that it has to be sort of like technically perfect. It's all about what is relevant to your intentions. So if you've intended to do an abstract painting, that doesn't specifically look like anything, is not trying to look exactly like something, then you need to review your work in relation to that. And a lot of this is also this idea of where it says here, insights through drawing and annotation. Now, that is something that they brought in the new spec not too long ago, and you can lose marks if you do not have drawing and annotation in your book, in your work anywhere. And annotation can be as simple as having a simple mind map. It can be as simple as having some titles, having subtitles in your work. So if you're really at that point, probably very rarely happens that someone doesn't include any annotation, because to not have some writing in your book and lose marks would be silly. So even if you're on the minimal ability here, it would be silly to lose 4 marks in this box by not having any written work. And of course, drawing in art can be, again, quite tricky to not include when you're doing art, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a lot of drawing. It doesn't mean, oh, you should have pencil drawings everywhere in your book. You might paint, you might sculpt, and that's absolutely fine. But if you do sculpt, then you might just have a design, for example. And with photography, that drawing could be simply having a sketch of what you plan to go and do. It could be as simple as a stickman sketch, and you could still get top marks, have amazing photos, have an amazing project, and your drawing element is literally just some stickman figures, just showing that you are, for example, what you're planning on doing with your photo shoot, for example. That could literally be it. So don't stress about it saying drawing. If that's not your thing, you can work around it. It really doesn't matter. But obviously this student does like to draw, and that is one of their skills, so they include a lot of it. So recording ideas, and it does mention annotation as well. So yeah, okay, to not lose marks, you need to include like some titles or just some sort of annotation at all. But if you're going to be in the highly developed ability to skillfully record ideas through drawing and annotation, then you need to show a highly developed ability with your written annotation. You need to show a real understanding of what you're doing. And recording ideas doesn't mean just visual recording of ideas. It also means that you can write about your ideas. So really explain your work, explain your thoughts on your work. That is really important. And again, that comes into assessment objective 1 when we're talking about being critical of the work. Really critique your work and find what's not working with it, what is working with it, and so on. And just writing about those things. And not only writing them, but if you say, oh, this would be better if I did this, then do it. Do it and then talk about it again. Don't just say, oh, this would be better, and then not bother doing anything else with it. So assessment objective 4, present a personal and meaningful response that realises intentions and demonstrates understanding of visual language. So again, with the idea of realising intentions, this does talk about particularly about outcomes and things. So how do you bring those ideas? So yeah, okay, we've got a lot of experimentation, particularly in this book, but how does that come to some sort of conclusion in the end? And maybe with this project, not so much. Like if you have extra supporting work, which you can have, it doesn't necessarily have to include every single assessment objective. But of course, there are elements of that with some of the outcomes that are outside the book. Like this, for example. So having just some larger pieces of work outside can help with that. But really this is where she achieves this more with this project, which is more personal, meaningful, and she has lots of outcomes and lots of ways of, with a highly skilled ability to present these ideas and present these thoughts. And if you look back at her intentions, so if we're looking at this work, and then we flip back to the very start, perspectives and things that she had at the start, you can see that she's kept on topic. She's really, really thoroughly looked at how she can achieve these things and looked at lots of different ways throughout. So you can really see the journey of this project and the work that she's ended up with as well. And just to show you how she really achieves that 7 rather than, you know, it being a 6, maybe is that, you know, after she does a final piece, she then has some spare time and then does a little bit more development. So she goes further than others in the class with what she's doing. So she's looking at this idea. So again, this artist doesn't necessarily link to humans and animals, but she's taking it and using it in a different way, which we'll see in a moment. So she's created that, and then she's gone and really experimented further with some photos of one of her friends, you know, and some cat pictures. And a lot of the time she's got her own pictures, and of course sometimes it might just be more practical to choose an image off Google, which is also fine. You just need to say that. Don't try and say that it's your own picture when it's not. But she experiments again thoroughly first, and then we can really see some lovely work here, really skillful. And that, to be honest, you know, lots of these things look nice on their own anyway. Every page is presented really clearly. Every single page pretty much picks up on each of the assessment objectives in some way. And then she does this final piece, which I've seen you. So she's kind of got a number of outcomes for this, which really helps. So hopefully you found this video helpful, and just remember to make sure that you're doing all 4 of the assessment objectives that you want, you know, to submit your work overall. But it doesn't matter if you do something for experimentation or a few random pieces that are off topic that you just want to add in extra. So if you're really low on, for example, assessment objective 3, where you're recording your ideas skillfully, and maybe the project you've done isn't that skillful, you could always do something else that is skillful and add it in. Maybe you've done something as a summer project or a homework or something extra that you wanted to add in, that can go in as your additional work. So you just need the one sustained project. A project like this could be much longer. It doesn't necessarily have to be, as you can see. And then that extra work just to boost it and support it. And in this case, that extra work here, which was done earlier on, really boosted that assessment objective 2 with showing lots and lots of different experimentation, showing skill specifically as well. So it really boosted assessment objective 2 and 3, whereas 1 and 4 were seen particularly a lot more in this project.